The cabin lights flickered softly as passengers settled into their seats, the usual shuffle of carry-ons and quiet chatter filling the air. Then, without warning, the tone shifted. A little black girl, maybe 8, dressed neatly in a pink hoodie, and holding a stuffed bear, stepped into the first-class aisle with wide, curious eyes. But before she could reach her seat, the flight attendant stepped in front of her with a tight, condescending smile. "Honey, this section isn't for economy," she said sharply, snatching the boarding pass from the girl's hand without even glancing at it. "You need to go back." The girl, confused and embarrassed, whispered, "But this is what my mom booked." That's when it happened. From a few rows back, Clint Eastwood, wearing a worn jacket and carrying nothing but a paperback novel, stood up slowly. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The moment his boots hit the aisle floor, everything stopped. Passengers turned, silence spread like a wave, and the flight attendant froze, suddenly aware that this was no ordinary passenger. Clint walked forward, took the girl's boarding pass from her trembling hand, and looked at the seat number. Then, without breaking eye contact with the attendant, he said, "This seat's hers. You got a problem with that?" The tone in his voice wasn't loud, but it was final, like a quiet storm you don't see coming until it's right in front of you. And just like that, the entire mood of the flight shifted. The flight attendant's face flushed, her mouth opening slightly as if to respond, but no words came out. She glanced around nervously, realizing every eye in first class and beyond was now locked on her. A few passengers had even pulled out their phones, quietly recording. Clint didn't move. He stood next to the girl, one hand resting gently on her shoulder, the other still holding her boarding pass. "She's paid for this seat," he said firmly. "You owe her an apology." The attendant stammered, trying to salvage control. "I didn't mean anything by it, I just—" Clint cut her off with a simple nod toward the girl's seat, then let her sit. The girl hesitated, unsure if she should still be scared, but Clint leaned down and whispered, "You've got more courage than most adults on this plane. Go ahead, kiddo." As she sat down, carefully placing her bear on the armrest, something remarkable happened. A man in business attire from 2 rows behind spoke up. "Hey, flight crew, maybe let's treat people like people, yeah?" A murmur of agreement followed. The flight attendant, now clearly shaken, retreated down the aisle. But what nobody saw coming was the quiet reveal Clint was about to make. He pulled his own ticket from his pocket, economy class, and took a deep breath. "I'll switch with her mom," he said. "No kid should sit alone when they've been made to feel small." And with that, the tension broke. But what Clint didn't know, what nobody knew yet, was who this little girl really was and why she was flying alone. As Clint made his way toward economy to find the girl's mother, a middle-aged woman near the back wiped her eyes and stood up shakily. "I'm her mom," she said, her voice trembling. Passengers parted as she stepped forward, eyes locked on her daughter now settled in the front. She passed Clint and paused, her hand gently brushing his arm. "Thank you," she whispered, tears welling up. Clint nodded but didn't speak. He just gave a faint smile and gestured toward the seat. The woman walked down the aisle like someone who hadn't felt seen in years, until now. But then, just as things seemed to calm, a man near the galley leaned toward the attendant and muttered, "Overreaction. Probably a publicity stunt." That's when Clint stopped, turned around, and walked right back up the aisle. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. But the air shifted again as he stood before the man and said, "Publicity doesn't buy respect, but silence? In moments like this? That's what keeps injustice alive." The man sank into his seat, red-faced and quiet. Meanwhile, the little girl looked out the window, unaware that half the internet would soon be rallying around her story. What Clint knew, and what the world was about to find out, was that this wasn't just about a seat on a plane. It was about dignity. And the reason the girl was flying alone? That was the final twist no one saw coming, just as the plane began. To taxi. A soft voice from the girl's row caught Clint's attention. She was talking to her teddy bear, whispering, "Mom said if I ever get scared, just remember the story of the quiet cowboy who always showed up when people needed him." Clint blinked, the words hitting deeper than expected. He turned slightly, curiosity rising. How did she know that story? Moments later, her mother leaned over and quietly explained to a nearby passenger, just loud enough for Clint to hear. Her father passed away last year. He used to read her old Western books every night before bed. Her favorite character? A silent man with a strong heart who always stood up for the little guy. She used to say he reminded her of Clint Eastwood. A silence fell over the front rows, heavy with emotion. Clint, now standing near the curtain separating first class from the rest of the plane, closed his eyes for a moment. It all made sense. This wasn't random. This was full circle. He walked back up to the girl one last time, knelt beside her seat, and said gently, "That story you remember, it's still being written, and today, you're the bravest part of it." Her eyes widened, and for the first time since boarding, she smiled. Not a nervous smile, a proud one. And as the plane lifted into the sky, Clint sat quietly in his new seat, staring out at the clouds, knowing that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply show up. Mid-flight, as most passengers dozed off or buried themselves in in-flight entertainment, a soft knock came from the cockpit service door. A flight attendant handed Clint a note with shaky hands. The little girl asked, "Me to give you this?" she said quietly. Clint unfolded it slowly. It was a child's drawing, crayon-sketched clouds, a tiny plane, and a tall figure beside a little girl holding hands. Underneath, in wobbly letters, it read, "Thank you for being my hero today." For a man known for stoicism and grit, something shifted in Clint's eyes. No words, just the kind of look that told 1,000 stories. He folded the drawing carefully, tucked it inside his jacket, and nodded at the attendant. "Make sure she gets some extra cookies," he whispered with a rare grin. What no one expected was what happened when the plane landed. As they stepped out, reporters were already waiting at the gate, not for Clint, but for the girl. Her uncle had contacted the media, telling them what happened. Cameras flashed, questions flew, and in the middle of it all stood the little girl, gripping her, bare, confused, and overwhelmed. Clint placed a gentle hand on her shoulder and stepped in front of the microphones. "No interviews. She's just a kid," he said. "But if you want a story, tell this. Kindness doesn't cost a thing, but it pays back more than anything you'll ever buy." With that, he tipped his head to the girl, walked toward a waiting car, and disappeared into the crowd. But the drawing, that stayed with him, folded next to his heart, a quiet reminder that sometimes the smallest moments echo the loudest. Weeks later, Clint Eastwood was seen walking into a children's art exhibit in a quiet corner of Los Angeles. No press, no security, just him, dressed simply, holding something small in his hand. He made his way through the rows of drawings until he found a frame with familiar crayon clouds and a smiling cowboy figure beside a girl with curly hair. It was the same drawing, the one she gave him on the flight. She'd submitted it anonymously, titled only, "The Day I Wasn't Invisible." A nearby curator approached and whispered, "She said it was based on a real moment but never said who it was." Clint simply smiled and nodded. Let it stay that way. Then, without ceremony, he donated a quiet sum in the girl's name to the children's shelter listed beneath the exhibit. As he turned to leave, someone asked if he'd like his name on the donation wall. He paused at the exit, looked back, and said, "No, she already knows." Then he vanished into the California evening. No spotlight, no speeches, just the same silent cowboy who always shows up when someone needs him.